Welcome to the Dire Wolf Show, where we believe that America is exceptional and that our constitutional rights should never be infringed. I am Dire Wolf. On our show, we bring you the truth and debunk fake news. If you love laughing at the insanity of the regressive left, sit back and relax. Boy, do I have a show for you.
All right. Knock, knock, guys. Welcome back, Wolf Pack. This is Dire Wolf not here because I'm Fox Trevize, and it's Fox Fridays, which means no Dire Wolves allowed, which is unfortunate, really, because Dire really wanted to be here tonight. And he definitely didn't just skip out on us because he's busy petting his dog on OnlyFans. I promise you that's not the reason why he's not here. But that doesn't mean that I'm alone tonight, as tonight I have been joined by another wolf and friend of the show, Krieg Blackpaw. Welcome, Krieg. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Drink of the evening is Yingling Oktoberfest.
Ooh, nice. Good choice. I am drinking water and a Monster, which is slightly different than what you're So, as you guys know, the last few solo shows that I've done, we've covered some, shall we say, controversial topics. So tonight, purely for the protection of our guest's reputation, that Krieg Blackpaw has a keeps in very high esteem. We thought that we'd switch gears. We thought we'd switch gears, just for your benefit, and talk about something that's definitely not controversial at all. No controversy whatsoever. Breonna Taylor. But first, I have to thank our sponsors. This show is only possible because of viewers like you. We would especially like to thank those of you that donate to us financially, including Kaylette, Ori Main, Nathan, Cameron, Tetris Freak, Slowpoke, Thundra Erican, who is female, The White Lion, who is a lion, Timberwolf, who is a wolf, and of course the guy that started it all, Dire Wolf, who is not currently live on OnlyFans. Money is not the only way you can give, though. We also appreciate you liking and subscribing to us on DLive, Twitch, and YouTube. And we especially like when you share out our links to the channel on any social media you happen to find yourself on, as we have no algorithm that will do this for us. Also, special reminder, due to some recent policy changes on YouTube, it is highly likely that our YouTube channel is going to be getting age restricted, just like Dire's OnlyFans, and you may only be able to, or you may not be able to easily find our content anymore because it's age restricted. This is something that YouTube has decided that any channel that is not worthy of monetization will also be age restricted by a AI bot, which sounds lovely. I can't wait for that to happen. But if we do get age restricted, that means our content won't show up unless you're subscribed to us. It will not be recommended in any of your autoplays, and you may or may not be able to share it. And if you do share it, the person that's clicking on that link might not be able to view it unless they're logged in and they've got certain settings on their account. So a lot of fun. Yeah. So if you would like to get around this for your personal use, though, make sure that you're subscribed to us on YouTube with that bell clicked, which will probably not do anything. But also follow us on alternate platforms like DLive and Twitch, as well as following Dire and I on Twitter, so that you'll be more likely to see a notification when we do go live. And even if YouTube doesn't tell you, you can kind of go out there and hunt it down yourself and still have access to our replays on the other networks there. But enough of all that house cleaning. Tonight we are discussing Breonna Taylor and the situation around that, and all of the subtopics within that story, because Breonna Taylor's story is a very large story. Most of it's not true, and the parts that are morally correct but factually false are still important, even though they never happened. So we'll get into some of that tonight. And before this will be as is typical. will be kind of more of an unscripted conversation between Krieg and I. But before we get too far off the rails, we're going to do a quick kind of recap of what the media said happened in the Breonna Taylor story and what we now have learned this week actually happened in the Breonna Taylor story. So I'll read out the parts where it's what the media said, Krieg, and then you can read out what actually happened. Okay. So Breonna Taylor, the media told us that Breonna Taylor was asleep in her bed when the police broke into her house and murdered her.
That is false.
Oh my gosh.
Actually, she was in the hallway behind her boyfriend while he was shooting at said police officers.
Oof, that's a little bit different.
Just a hair.
Okay, so the police also said that the cops barged in using a no-knock warrant and were wearing plain clothes and did not identify themselves. From the perspective of Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend, it could have been anybody. It could have been a home invasion.
Yeah, false. The cops had a no-knock warrant, but they did not use it. This was not a no-knock raid. They knocked several times, and the boyfriend even admitted that they knocked.
Yes. Let's see here. So the boyfriend admitted that they did knock, and then we have testimony from the neighbors that the police did shout out several times, "We are the police," though the boyfriend stands by saying that he did not hear them identify themselves as police. So this one's a little bit hairy here, but so the other thing that the media told us was that Breonna Taylor was an innocent party in this whole thing, totally innocent. She was a good boy, good girl. She was an EMT. They always show her in her little EMT uniform, which I'm going to get into that in a little bit here. But what is the first reason why that's false, Krieg? Why is she maybe not as innocent as the media and BLM would have liked us to think?
So, like, as like a lot of people don't know and don't understand, she's actually enlisted on the warrant. So, you know, she wasn't just somebody that happened to be there. She was listed on the warrant along with her boyfriend as well. And she's alleged to have assisted her previous drug lord boyfriend in moving packages through her very own address. She's also had an incident where a dead body was found in a car she rented in 2016. This was also seemingly related to the drug trafficking charges.
When's the last time you accidentally left a dead body in a rental car?
Actually, it was just last weekend. We were at a party, and
you and Dyer both. What is it with you military guys and accidentally leaving dead bodies in rental cars?
Well, you know, if somebody touches my fox, just
do what you know, right?
Instincts kick in. Can't help myself.
It's not our fault. So that's actually a bit of information that one Steven Crowder, intrepid journalist Steven Crowder, I believe he was the one that broke the information about Breonna Taylor having had a dead body in a rental car in 2016, which, all joking aside, is pretty uncommon. Most people, that is not a thing that they've either done, nor do they know anyone who has accidentally left a dead body in a rental car. And, that might be interesting information to know in the case, but the quote-unquote real media, the legacy media, did not find that information. And it was Crowder who happened to dredge that up earlier this week, because comedians are the main source of news and investigative journalism these days, because 2020, everyone.
Yeah.
Let's see. So yeah, that's important though. What you were saying though about the warrant. A lot of the BLM narrative and the mainstream media narrative said that Breonna Taylor wasn't involved in any of the stuff that was going on, but she was actually listed on the warrant because there was through the investigation of her previous boyfriend, who was actively a drug lord, and her current boyfriend, who was previously convicted of being a drug lord, and may or may not have still been in the business. She is known to have at least helped her previous boyfriend with whatever that dead body was doing in a rental car. But she's also, during their investigation, they found that she was using her address so that he could move packages and mail around with an address that wasn't linked to his name directly. And so she was assisting him in that way. Let's see here. So her, again, that's important too. Is so her previous boyfriend was the one that was currently being investigated for drug trafficking, and she had only broken up with him like the month before. Like the media tried to make it like this was like a long time ago kind of a thing, but like it really wasn't. And then her boyfriend that she had currently, when at the time of her death, was previously convicted of drug trafficking. So I kind of think she had a type.
Yeah, and that's the thing about capitalism. Sometimes you have low-risk business and sometimes you have high-risk business. She chose a very risky business, and with risky businesses come risky consequences. Yeah. And it's essentially the result.
Yeah. Which kind of gets a little bit into some of the libertarian arguments that we've been hearing, which I know is a topic that you are highly interested in discussing tonight. And yes. we'll be getting into that pretty deep here in a little bit. Kind of this idea of, well, the drug war. Without the drug war, we wouldn't have had this incident in the first place. And the problem isn't necessarily racist cops; it's probably the drug war problem, and back and forth. So we'll hold your horses, guys. We will get into that conversation, I promise you. But another thing that I want to bring up that is often brought up as a point in Breonna's favor, that the media likes to continuously say, Breonna Taylor, the EMT, she was an EMT, she was an EMT, she was an EMT. And that's supposed to gin up in your mind kind of this like noble profession. She's out there like helping people and all this stuff. This is pure speculation. But I do want to flip this narrative just a little bit here. Let's flip that a second and put the fact that she was an EMT, let's put that in the context that she has a problem with dating drug lords. Isn't it a little coincidental that she has a problem dating drug lords, and she also just so happens to have a job that puts her in close proximity to a lot of controlled substances? Pure speculation, but is it possible that she was maybe an EMT for reasons unrelated to wanting to help people? I think an interesting question might be is if the let's say the supply logs for her ambulance were reviewed as compared to other ambulances in her network, would there be a discrepancy in the usage of certain drugs or medical supplies perhaps? It's an interesting question. I don't think that we'll be able to answer that because most ambulance companies are private companies, actually, so you can't FOIA them in that way. And they're probably not going to be willing to give up that information for a lot of reasons. But I think it would be an interesting avenue of investigation. And so I don't want to, again, that was pure speculation. I say that all without evidence, but I do find it to be an interesting coincidence. And if the media and BLM is allowed to tout that she's an EMT as, that's a point in her favor, as, she's, the infinite goddess of all good because she's an EMT. I think it's maybe I'm getting a little too down in the dirt with the media, playing their game, but I think turnabout's fair play. I think there's a good question there to be asked about, well, maybe, it's pretty common. It's pretty common that healthcare workers will be stealing drug supplies. That's pretty common. So I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm actually on here on the Addiction Center's website, and they have a specific article about substance use paramedics and EMTs. And according to them, so essentially what they're trying to say here, and I'll share this link with you, but what they're attempting to say is that EMTs suffer from an extremely high rate of sleep deprivation, PTSD, and depression, which makes them a very high-risk candidates for substance abuse and criminal activity in relation with substance abuse. And it's an unfortunate like side effect of the job, but like her being an EMT doesn't make her any more innocent than Kyle Rittenhouse being an EMT makes him a neo-Nazi. Like it's a job essentially. But at the end of the day, you do have to realize that EMTs, medical health technicians, these kind of people, they have very ready access to these kinds of things, which is why normally medical professionals go through such like severe background checks and things. So yeah.
Yeah, and again, like I said, it appears that she had a type. That's fine. You like what you like, you love what you love. But it is to me an interesting coincidence that she is in a field that puts her in close proximity to that sort of stuff. I would be curious. I think it's a little late for that now, but I'd be curious what the IRS thought of her income if they saw any discrepancies in that too, because I do not believe, I could be wrong, I don't believe that being an EMT is typically the highest paying job. Not that it's not an important job, and certainly it probably deserves to be more highly paid. But that's why you see a lot of, again, it's kind of a trope, but it's common to see theft of medical supplies and medicines in the medical industry, because you either have people that they're not medically, they didn't go to medical school, but they're in the industry, so they're going to be lower paid, and that's a good way to make a quick buck on the side is stealing supplies. And then for the people that are doctors or interns or whatever the hell they are, they got $400,000 worth of college debt. That's been pretty common too, is that we've been seeing a lot of what you would consider to be white collar kids in their residency stealing stuff out of the supply closet. So pure speculation, and I'll probably cut it off there because I think I'm going a little too deep on that. But it's an interesting question. And the reason why I bring that up is because we see this pattern continuously, that Breonna Taylor is not the only. She's not anywhere near as bad as any of the other ones that we've seen, especially we got the Jacob Blake and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery. Just keep them going. The left and the BLM and the media make these people into just absolute angels, and 10 out of 10 times we find out that they're actually not the angels that the left said that they were. So I think it's if the left is going to outright lie about that sort of stuff, I think it's worthy of at least asking the question every now and then. But
yeah, like we're definitely not trying to like smear her or anybody else. Like, I think, Fox and I definitely realize that, everybody is innocent until proven guilty, and it would have been nice that the warrant could have actually been served so she could have had her day in court.
Yep.
But unfortunately, her boyfriend decided that he was going to, skip the investigation and go right to graveyard. So, like, there and like Fox was saying, there's such a bias in the media to side with the radicals that are looting and burning our cities, that these people are perfect saints, that I think, like Fox said, I think it is perfectly fair to offer a counterpoint, even if it does seem a little bit harsh, because it's worthwhile to explore every aspect of it, because that's fair. I believe that's fair.
Yeah. I think, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think, I know my position, I think yours was too, is that we both kind of agreed that she shouldn't have died. And, again, all of the media lies about the context of the story aside, and one of the things we're going to talk about is we still think that the tactics the police used were inappropriate, and that had they... that there was going to be a conversation. The start of this story several months ago, everybody was willing to have a conversation about police tactics and saying, hey, this is a problem. Breonna Taylor shouldn't have died. She was being properly investigated, but the tactics resulted in an unnecessary death, and even to the point where Rand Paul is putting forward a bill called the Breonna Taylor bill, which is the namesake is based on a lie, but the conversation is still important. So we'll get into that here in a minute too. Is we both I again, correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, but I think you agree that she probably shouldn't have died. The tactics were probably inappropriate for the situation.
Yeah, I definitely like. So I listened. I kind of wish more people would have, but I listened to the entirety of the Kentucky Attorney General's report on the 200-day long investigation that included the FBI, the grand jury, and even an independent investigation by CNN that sided with the results of the investigation, which is mind-boggling to me. Like, look, if CNN is calling it what it is, then Jesus, it must really be true. But anyway, the point is that, we had all this investigation, we had all these things. Nobody wanted either of them to die. Even if the scumbag boyfriend was the guy who left the dead body in the back of the car. Like, even if, in the most extreme case, he's some murderer, awful dude. Drug dealer's pretty bad too. Who knows? He could be pushing crap on kids. But they all deserve their day in court. And everybody right now is talking about defund the police, take away training, take away funding that these police officers have, when shouldn't what you want is more funding or appropriate allocation of funding, so that these police officers that raided their home could have been properly trained to deal with the situation, to not fire indiscriminately into a residential premises, so that they would know when to keep calm under pressure and things like that, to have resolved a better situation. I mean, there's honestly though, like, with what happened, I don't know how much better the situation could have gotten, for Breonna Taylor, because you're getting shot at. I mean, even if these guys weren't cops and it was the pizza guy and you had somebody start shooting at you, you have every right to return fire and defend yourselves. I mean, remove the law enforcement label from these guys and have them just as human beings. They have a right to defend themselves and their lives. I mean, unfortunately, it is what it is. However, for the people living in the apartment next door who had bullets coming through their walls, I think the Attorney General said it was a father, a pregnant mother, and a child, and these cops are now being put on trial. They are now on trial and indicted for endangering those people's lives. I mean, I'm a doomer. I don't believe in the system all the time, but I think this is one of the times where the system worked. I think the investigation happened and the cops are getting justice.
Yeah. So let's get into this, how the shots went back and forth, because that was kind of the final big lie. And we're going to get into what actually happened with the exchange of fire. This is kind of a, the Star Wars re-release kind of a thing of, who shot first. So the media told us that the police burst in and shot first. That's what we were originally told. That's what the BLM narrative has been. And again, you couple that with the original narrative was that Breonna Taylor was asleep in her bed when the cops burst in the apartment and executed her and shot first. Craig, what actually happened here? You kind of said it a little bit ago. Who actually shot first?
Yeah, Taylor's boyfriend shot first. The drug dealer dude shot first, and she was caught in a crossfire, unfortunately. And the thing is that I've seen, I'm in the ANCAP and the libertarian circles and things like that, and even some of the lib left circles, and the thing that people keep repeating over and over and over again is that somehow that. The cops, bursted in with a no-knock warrant and killed these people in cold blood, and they were wearing civilian clothes, and that shit's all just nonsense. It's just not true. And we have, and it's not like we're talking about this with zero evidence. I mean, you had ballistics reports and a ballistics investigation done by the FBI in Quantico, like one of the best ballistics teams in the world investigated this and came to the conclusion that the police officers definitely did not fire first. And coupled that with witness testimonies, which isn't always necessarily as good in court, but Jesus, man, you had Quantico involved. Like, it doesn't get much better than that.
Slight clarification. The one thing that the media said that might have been true is that the officers may have been in plain clothes. It's actually unclear. I know that's what the initial narrative was, that they were in plain clothes. Dyer and I, we could not find any verification one way or the other. All of the other counterpoints that we just talked about, we have verified sources on, but the plain clothes or were they in uniform, that we've not been able to verify one way or the other. So, we'll chalk one up for the media. So the media got 1 out of like 18 facts correct. Good job, guys. Nailed it.
Yeah, and I'm merely just like repeating what I've heard, and that is the one thing that I had a discussion with somebody about the other day was, yeah, if they were in plain clothes, first of all, if that was not procedure, the cop should be in big time doo-doo trouble. And the FBI is still investigating this situation for a violation of procedure and rules. So this isn't totally over. The investigation is purely just said that the cops, their actions were justified in the result of Breonna Taylor's death, which does not mean that her death was good and a moral like good. It just means that it was justified. Legality does not equal a moral good necessarily. It just means this is what happened.
Well, and in fact, the city settled for I think $12 million with the family for a wrongful death. Now that was civilly. It wasn't.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so the city paid out $12 million for a wrongful death in a civil court,
Wow.
which varies from the criminal court in that basically what that means, and this is a common thing that will happen with accidental police shootings where like somebody who wasn't supposed to die gets killed by the police, is the family will get paid out in civil court, but it won't be criminal because the police officer did that in the line of duty. Now that gets us into a whole other conversation that maybe we can have a little further down the line here tonight about qualified immunity. And the qualified immunity is what would have, I don't know about in this case, but in general, the qualified immunity is what would have blocked that from being a criminal case. But that doesn't mean that it's not civil. So that's actually a thing that can happen a lot when you get that's actually something you guys should know about for self-defense as well, is that you could have a good self-defense shoot that you don't get charged criminally for, but the person the person or people that were affected by your self-defense shoot, while it might be legally good and you're not going to get prosecuted criminally, they can still sue you civilly, and they will usually be successful with that. So that's something to think about, especially when you guys are looking at carry insurance. Look to see if they have just a little PSA from Fox here. Make sure that you've got civil liability coverage as well if you are looking at carry insurance. Because that is a way that they can come back after you. And so that's what the city did, was they just settled for that because that's what commonly happens. So it was wrong. It shouldn't have happened, but it wasn't criminal.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And the purpose is not to, and I think that's what people today are really struggling with, is that like the law is the law. Unless the law is telling you to load up Jews in boxcars and take them to Auschwitz, which is a clear moral wrong, self-defense is more often than not a gray area. And that's why you have to prove in criminal law beyond a reasonable doubt. Yeah, I don't see a way in which, from what we've been presented from the investigation, I don't see a way in which they could be tried with anything. I mean, and like the attorney general said, all of the events that happened that he took an hour and a half to explain um, happened within a matter of seconds.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that is true. The event happened in a matter of seconds, but the planning leading up to it, and I'll get into our tactics discussion here in a
Right.
bit. The planning leading up to it, like they had plenty of time to kind of game out how they thought that, the 20 different ways they thought that might have played out. They could have gamed that out, and it sounds like they maybe didn't do that. So one of the other things that, like you were saying, is that they're not going to get like them getting charged criminally for Breonna Taylor is just not going to happen. That was what this grand jury decision was. That was what the AG had that hour and a half long press conference about. Like, that's not happening. When you have a grand jury looking over this stuff and they can't find anything, especially with how some of the other grand juries around the nation have been finding crimes out of nothing and just making them up. If this grand jury couldn't find a crime, there wasn't a crime to find there. Now, that's in the context of Breonna Taylor. Now, what was also announced is that the officer that shot is getting charged with wanton endangerment of the occupants of the other apartments, which Krieg alluded to a little bit ago. And is that charge correct? Was the officer putting the other occupants of the apartment in unnecessary danger? And I say yes, absolutely. I am someone that identifies as a member of the apartment demographic, and I would really appreciate not catching bullets through my drywall because my neighbor's a drug lord. If I was involved in a self-defense incident, I would be responsible for knowing what is beyond my target. I'd be responsible if there was innocent lives behind the person I was defending myself against. I am responsible for where that bullet goes. The cops should not get just get immunity, just call it a mulligan off of that. They have to be responsible for what is beyond their target. And if it is other apartment dwellers that are not involved in this incident, they cannot shoot. It is not justifiable. And so in the incident where I would be held liable for that in a self-defense incident, typically if you're in a self-defense incident, you're being like preyed upon and you're not necessarily, I mean, you should be as ready as you can be, but it's something that happens in an instant. And you've got, a fraction of a second to react to it and make that decision if you're going to pull the trigger or not. And you have to do that, all that analysis of what's beyond your target, all that stuff you got to do in a split second. Now, what I was saying earlier, though, is that from the police tactics, because they were the ones that were planning the raid and approaching the house, they had hours, days, weeks to plan this raid out. They had plenty of time to consider, if a firefight breaks out, what is beyond our target? What is beyond the other side of that drywall? If I shoot down this hallway, I mean, they probably could have very easily gotten maps or general layouts of the apartments. They would have known what kind of situation they were getting into. They would have known that the entry hallway was a likely place for a shootout to break out. And they could have just looked to see, okay, if I shoot down this hallway and it doesn't go into a person, it's going to keep going down that hallway because that tends to be what bullets do. And it's going to go through that drywall. What's on the other side of that drywall? Oh, it's another goddamn apartment. They had all the time in the world to figure out what was going to be beyond their target, and they did not do that. They did not take that into consideration, and I think if they had, that raid would have been planned very, very differently. So should they be responsible for wanton endangerment of the occupants of the other apartment? Absolutely. The officer that shot should absolutely be responsible for endangering them. But his commanders and everyone that helped him plan that raid. I mean, officers don't just like squat up in a little group of two people and say, okay, we're gonna plan out a raid on a house and not consult our superiors on this at all. We're not going to consult the any intelligence gathering or anything like that. There was a lot of people that helped them plan that out, and all of them should be held liable for planning a raid in which it was deemed absolutely acceptable to have casualties in the other apartments.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think this is like where this is the problem, like Black Lives Matter was supposed to originally be about police reform, which it's no longer about. It's just about get rid of the police. And I with some of the original arguments, I mean, even around like the idea of defunding the police is okay. You have all these cops. They're getting all of this military gear now that the war in the Middle East is calming down. So you got the MRAPs, you got the M4s, you got grenade launchers, you got all of this crap. But none of them know how to use it because they're not being trained properly. I mean, you can if you're going to prepare to go into a building, a densely populated building, and you know that there's a possibility that you can get into a shootout. I mean, I was in infantry, so I don't know like the in and outs of like room clearing and everything. But what I can tell you is that why didn't they use something like birdshot or something, or something low velocity that's not going to penetrate walls and things like that? I mean, police officers have access to these things, and the planning and the training is just so piss poor on these police departments all across the country. And I think it's purely because it's not that the funds are necessarily being abused. Maybe they are, but they're being misallocated. They should be on training, making sure that if you're going to plan out a raid, that and it's in an apartment complex with women and children and all this other nonsense, that you have the appropriate equipment for the job, because you know that you're going to get into a shootout because this guy's a drug dealer and they found a dead body in his girlfriend's car. Like, dude, what is the matter with you? Like, and it's because, again, the training is just not there.
You bring up a really, really interesting point there, where you made the link between clearing a room over there in the desert over abroad, and then versus like, that's the military clearing buildings over there in war zones versus the police clearing buildings here in our civilized country where citizens live. And it's
we don't poop in the street.
Yes. Well.
Okay. Well, we're not all California.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Nancy's district is America too. No, it's interesting you bring that up, because, and then you bring up the training, and kind of what I heard out of that, and I didn't even think about that until you just said that, is you've essentially got police mimicking, with not enough training, they are mimicking what it is that more well trained, more better trained military infantry would be doing with clearing buildings in a war zone. The police are mimicking that, but with less training and probably the same weapons or similar weapons. And you brought up the idea of like, well, what if they use birdshot or something? I mean, just starting the conversation of, is it appropriate to clear a building in America with civilians present? Is it appropriate to use the exact same method to clear that building as you would use in a war zone? And I think obviously the answer is no. And like I said, you brought up the idea of different kinds of weapons. I bet you if we sat here and talked about this for a few minutes or an hour or whatever, I bet you we could come up with a lot of ideas of how to adjust those tactics to be more friendly to our home country, where you have a responsibility for protecting the citizens that are here, because we're Americans. And that clearly hasn't gone on, and that's a problem generally, which is why when this happened, there was a lot of people on all sides saying, hey, again, we were lied to, but we were told that this was a no-knock raid, and there was a lot of people that said, hey, there's problems with no-knock raids. Like, whether it's legal or not, we need to start having a discussion about maybe it shouldn't be legal. Maybe these tactics are not appropriate for protecting the liberties of innocents here in America. Again, as you said earlier, presumed innocent. Everyone's presumed innocent, even if you're being investigated for drug trafficking. But certainly the neighbors are presumed innocent. It shouldn't just be like, well, it's acceptable casualties that we lost, 3 or 4 neighbors when we did this drug raid. So I think that's a lot of conversation that needed to happen. I think it was starting to happen. And as we said, Rand Paul put out the Breonna Taylor Act, which was going to do a lot of reform on no-knock raids nationally, which I hope that still goes through. And that's part of the conversation tonight, is that these conversations still need to happen. It is still important because we saw... I don't know if you're aware of the story. We talked about it on the show, I think it was last month, but maybe like 5 or 6 weeks ago. There was this case in Arizona that was really, really hard to watch. It was it was at an apartment complex, and the police showed up for what they were told was a domestic dispute. But you can hear on the body cam and the radio that they know that the person calling in the domestic was lying about it, that they were just trying to get their neighbors in trouble because the music was too loud or something. And so the cops go into this knowing that they're not actually going to the call that they think that they're going to. Like, they know that they know that this is kind of like a prank call kind of a thing. And so they go to this apartment. They knock on the door, identify themselves as, I think that they identify themselves as police. I can't remember. But the guy opens, no, they didn't. They just knocked on the door. They did not identify themselves as police. The guy opens the door. It's 12:30 at night. He has a gun in his hand, because not aimed, it's just at low, because previously that apartment had been burglarized. Their apartment had attempted break-in within the last few weeks before that. He opens the door, not knowing who's there at 12:30 in the morning. It's America. He's certainly allowed to have a gun. He's dead on the ground less than a second and a half after he opens the door. The cops knocked on the door, he opened the door, and they just immediately blew him away for having a gun. And actually, he actually got the gun on the ground out of his hand by the time the officer had fired the first shot. So he had already been disarmed, and the officer just pumped him, like almost mag dumped him. And it was really, really hard to watch, but it was one of those things where it was like, Jesus Christ, like, that is not okay. And these no-knock raids, one of the things that that the right was talking about at the beginning of this conversation was, hey, no-knock raids, if you bust into my door, I don't know who you are. If you don't say that you're the police, if you're in plain clothes and you knock my door down, this is America. I've got guns. I'm thinking it's a home invasion. I'm going to shoot at you. And it can't just be like, oh, well, like, oops, we're cops. Like, now you've committed a felony. Like, no. Like, it can't be like that. There's an expectation that there should absolutely be an expectation that, one, the citizens that you are raiding are innocent until proven guilty. And then two, it should be presumed that they have weapons. If there's no other reason to indicate that they don't have a legal right to weapons, it should be assumed that they're going to have weapons on them, and that they will maybe not be reacting nicely to people breaking into their house. Now, that's not to say that there's no reason to ever have a raid, but that needs to be taken into account, and that doesn't seem to be something that's taken into account in these tactics. And that's why we see stuff like this where the cop, you just open your door. There's a whole bunch of other incidents like that too. There was one last summer, and I can't remember what her name was, and I hate that these incidents where it's like actually a sad thing that happened. It was actually unjustified killing by the police. They're never talked about by the media, and I always forget what their names are. But it was last summer in Texas. It was a single mother with a black family, single mother with her son. It was I don't know what day it was, but it was like late at night, and it was dark out. It's Texas, so it's warm. It was summertime, so they had the front door open. She felt safe enough for that to be had to leave their house. She was playing video games with her low teens son. Really sounds like a great person. She had legally owned firearm in Texas, should be expected. The police got a call that the front door was open, and they were told that it was a possible burglary. So they sent a squad car out there, and the officer went around and looked at the door, and then he starts creeping around the backyard. He didn't call into the house. He didn't say like, hey, it's the police or anything like that. He started walking around the backyard. It's dark out, so you can't see his uniform. He's got a flashlight. He's looking around their backyard. He starts looking in the windows, and she's sitting there like, oh crap, like I don't know, somebody like sneaking into my backyard. They're gonna try and break in or whatever. And so she has her handgun, and she goes and looks out the window to see somebody sneaking around her backyard with a flashlight. The officer looks at her through the window, sees that she has a gun, and then puts like 6 bullets into her and kills her. That was sad. And again, it was this idea that you have cops that are entering themselves into a situation where it should be assumed that the American citizen is armed, and they're not acting with tactics accordingly, and they're just reacting and blowing these people away. And that goes along with all these discussions. Again, to caveat, the Breonna Taylor situation, we were lied to, but that doesn't change that the tactic of no-knock raids, of police not properly identifying themselves, of the lack of training for how to be clearing buildings in a civilian context, that is all massive, massive problems, and especially to the gun community, to the legal firearm owners. They're very, very dangerous for us.
Isn't that funny? Like, because anytime that there's a situation where it's a fair, defense for, the legal firearm owner, it doesn't go past the midnight news.
Dyer and I were blown away that the one from Texas last summer didn't go viral. It was again all by every available metric of information, she was a fantastic mother, and then now her kid just doesn't have any parents, I guess, and she was doing everything right, and she just got executed. Same thing with this guy in Phoenix, Arizona. Just everything right, just gets executed. But those are actual innocents. Those are actual innocents that were killed via problems inherent to police tactics that are solvable with conversation. And we were hoping that was the conversation that BLM wanted to have. And there was a lot of people that were open to that conversation, but it's just not been that.
Yeah, I have three small points that, especially listening to the first story you shared about the guy who was blown away in his apartment by the police officers. I had never heard that story before, or even the one about the single mom in Texas. But the 3 points that immediately come to mind, and I'm by no means like a law enforcement expert or anything like that. I was in the military, but I was an IT guy. But I did grow up in a self-defense instructor's household. I did join the military. I was, in the Boy Scouts. We learned a lot of things as well. And, the three things that come up to me is A, training. I mean, it just screams just a lack of training and preparedness and being in the right frame of mind for every single mission that you go into. And then the second one is, you're not the military. These aren't, the Taliban that you're possibly investigating that have a religious, authority to cut your head off. These are your fellow citizens. And I think the way you solve that is through presumption of innocence and community policing. I have a really, really good friend of mine. He's currently a regional director for Department of Homeland Security. He spent a lot of time in North Dakota in college, and he loves it up there. He goes up there regularly. And he talked to me about some of the way they do community policing in North Dakota in certain areas. And the way they do policing is very different than you have especially in big cities. What they'll do is they only pick police officers to walk a beat on the areas that they live in, or especially if they grew up in those areas. And they are actually, so first of all, they don't wear like what you would normally perceive as a typical police uniform. They wear polo shirts and like tactical pants or whatever, and they open carry their firearms and their gear. And they're very much discouraged from getting in a squad car and just driving around their beat. They're encouraged to get out and walk that beat and walk around and get to know their community. In fact, they're even given a stipend to go to a restaurant on their beat or a local, establishment, sit down and have conversations with people in their community to get to know their community better. And their perspective is it's not about catching the bad guys, because that's what it seems like so much anymore. It's and a lot of libertarians and BLM talk about this too, about a militarization of the police, where it's about gotta catch the bad guys instead of protecting people from the bad guys, and always presuming, like the incident that you just described with the single mother. If the police officer would have went into that with, of course, his head on a swivel, always prepared for anything, and keeping a hostile interaction in the back of his mind, but going into that situation with the frame of mind of, oh, well, the door's open, so maybe whoever lives here just forgot and left it open. So, make yourself known, present yourself. Hi, this is the police, we're here checking in on you. If it was a burglary and the burglar got away, at least you didn't kill the single mom.
Yeah, and in addition to that idea of keep it in your mind that you are going to be interacting with a citizen of the United States, also keep in mind citizens of the United States have a legal right to keep and bear firearms, and if they don't know who you are, they might have a gun in their hand, rightfully so, if there's somebody on their property and they don't know who it is. Even if you announce yourself as a police officer, that doesn't give you immediate license to blow away somebody who's not aiming a gun at you. And that is something that is not being kept in mind enough. Again, this conversation is happening alongside what we thought the Breonna Taylor situation was. And again, I'll keep reiterating, what we thought we knew about it was all lies. The police officers were being shot at first. They had, where I think that they screwed up, Max, we just talked about the tactics being wrong. In the moment, if they're being shot at by a bad guy, go ahead and shoot back. But their problem was in the lead up. They should have never even raided that house in that way, or that apartment in that way. They should have said, you know what? This apartment is laid out in such a way that it is impossible for us to raid it safely. So we are going to figure out an alternative way of capturing these people when they are not in their residence. That would have been the proper way to handle that. But I totally agree with the idea that they need to be keeping in mind these things a lot better, that they're meant to protect the community, not that we're going to be catching the bad guy. They needed to go into it thinking there's probably people in the area that I'm trying to protect, not going into there thinking everyone's a threat.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why, like, we really have to reevaluate. I mean, and in the national conversation, personally, I feel really should be, what does policing mean? Like, what is our objective? And when I sat in like some small law classes in college, like very like minor things, one of the things that we talked about that was very different from how we do law here in the United States from other places in the world is, here we not only have a presumption of innocence, but we also are more interested in making sure that innocent people aren't wrongly prosecuted over a couple of bad guys getting away with it. We're more interested, and our law system was created to try and make sure that innocent people are treated fairly. And personally, I feel the way we've gotten with some of our policing tactics, we've kind of got away from that. And I think that I'm going to bring up the big bad. I think the drug war has kind of unfortunately put a nasty spin on that, because, I mean, why risk raiding and shooting into an apartment complex just to nab some drugs? I mean, maybe I don't think there were murder charges or anything crazy like that. I don't think the guy was posing an imminent threat to the people in his community. What was the point? What was the point of putting not only the people, the suspects, Breonna Taylor and her boyfriend, the people in the apartment complex, and the police officers in harm's way to nab some drugs?
Yeah. I totally agree with that. And Dyer has had a similar take on it when we were discussing this previously. To kind of preface what I'm about to say, there are situations where I think a high risk raid a raid which would have high risk of collateral damage is warranted, and that would be in a situation where there's an active harm occurring, where there's somebody being held hostage. We just heard a lot of stories over the last month of the FBI, doing raids to rescue like hundreds and hundreds of trafficked children. If there is trafficked children locked in somebody's basement, there is a reason to do a high risk raid on that to stop this active threat. But as you just said, drug trafficking, it doesn't even matter if it's good or bad, whatever anybody wants to think about it. It is not actively, like there was not actively somebody being harmed in that household. It did not require the emergency of a high risk raid. I think that whether you guys agree with the drug war or not, I think that similar to what you said earlier, that there's kind of this idea in their head that they're going after bad guys rather than protecting the community. The drug war has also morphed into not necessarily protecting the community, but go after the drugs at absolutely any cost. Again, at the cost of maybe sending a few extra bullets into a completely innocent family's apartment through the walls. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the collateral is. We got to get those drugs. And so probably the biggest problem with the drug war is the overzealousness with which it is executed.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say too, like in addition, the few bullets spared into the innocent family's home, but I'm also gonna say in addition to that, to give Breonna Taylor and Kenneth Walker their fair chance at trial. Maybe they were like absolute scumbags peddling heroin to little kids at the playground, but we'll never know that. Yeah. Because police officers aren't being trained properly, and because we have such a zealous intent to regulate what the law determines as illicit substances, is it really worth it? Is it worth all of this? I mean, look, if we want to keep certain drugs illegal, whatever, but again, the presumption of innocence and protecting the innocent is first and foremost should be the forefront of how our policing is practiced.
Yeah. So I think another thing, and this kind of goes in with the drug war as well, is it kind of underlies everything, is you have, I think on more than just this topic, in this country we have two groups of people who think that they're talking about the same thing, but they're talking about totally different things. And so one of the things that Dyer and I have noticed with the with policing discussion this year is that you have a lot of city people talking about police brutality, and you have a lot of people that are in smaller towns or in rural areas saying, there is no police injustice. There is no police brutality. What are you talking about? We've got, we live in South Dakota. The police are wearing polo shirts and coming to my restaurant. Like that's, so you have these two different groups of people, and those two demographics of city dwellers and rural folk also tend to have high correlation with which side of the aisle you find yourself politically. And so that is part of the problem is over-militarization of the police. I think I have some complex thoughts on that, but I guess just for sake of brevity, the over-militarization of the police, only really a problem in the cities. You're not seeing rural areas having issues with the over-militarization of their police. They may be militarizing. I know my small town has one of those big those armored truck things, whatever they're called.
Probably MRAPs.
Yeah. I know they got one of those, but it's all painted up nice and pretty, and it's got the city name and the logo and stuff like that. It's this really, really shiny coat of black paint on it. It looks beautiful. The tires are all waxed. Like that thing's not been anywhere. But you got these cities where they do roll those out on occasion, and that's part of that is with dealing with the drug trade, and the drug trade is not just with street dealers, like probably with what Breonna Taylor was dealing with her boyfriends. But you also got a lot of you got a lot of gang activity that is facilitating that network, and it's kind of been an arms race between the drug cartels and the city police. And that's going on in the small towns to a certain extent, but the cities is where the main distribution hubs are. So that's where you can get people at, and that's where the police need to be arming, or that's where the police feel that they need to be arming up at, is because that's where the main battle is for the drugs. Now my area, without giving away too much of where I'm at, but my area is a major corridor, small towns, but it's a major drug corridor. But the local police aren't usually super interested in it because the drugs are just moving through the area. They're not staying in the area. And that's more of an FBI issue at that point. But the cops aren't actively going out to these small farm towns and trying to stop the supply chain. They're doing that in the cities. And then again, as you said, you got this small town cop mentality where they're part of the community. There's intent behind walking your beat in areas that you're familiar with people that you're familiar with. Whereas in the cities, it's the absolute polar opposite, where you're specifically walking beats and routes that you're not a part of that community, that you are coming in from a different part of the city or even a different suburb, and you're intentionally not patrolling the areas that you're familiar with, because there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of it is cited as just being risky for the officers, because people know, a lot of these officers prefer that people don't know where they live or who they are, and so they will patrol in other areas to try and keep it anonymous. And so you have these cities that are designed around your anonymous badge number, going around and stopping crime, and you got the small town folk where you have Officer Friendly. He's you know him, he knows your dad, and you guys played, you went to bowling league with him a few times, and he's probably his kid was probably in Boy Scouts with you. You got that kind of mentality in the small towns, but in the big cities you don't. And so really what we're seeing, and one of the things that Dyer and I have been saying for at least the last 2 months now is we can't be default thin blue line anymore. It's got to be verify. So I have looked into, and I've recommended this to the audience, is you need to be conditionally thin blue line now. It's got to be it's got to be verify. So I'm no longer default because I've seen too many times where you got the police are, like arresting the McCloskeys, or again, blowing away gun owners for no reason. And again, mostly that's in the big cities, but still, it just can't be default anymore. Okay. It just can't be default support anymore. And so what we've said is, you need to be, look into your local departments, look into, maybe go call your sheriff, talk to them about some of the gun laws being proposed in other states or maybe in your state that are unconstitutional seizures, like what we saw in Virginia, and ask your local sheriff, like, are you going to support a mandate like we saw in Virginia? And we saw this in Virginia at the beginning of the year. You had a lot of county sheriffs saying these are unconstitutional mandates. We will not be enforcing them. We've seen this in a lot of other states where you've had a lot of we've seen this in a lot of other states where we've had sheriffs saying, we will not be confiscating guns. That is unconstitutional. We will not be enforcing unconstitutional dictates. If that's your sheriff, great. Thin blue line all the way. Support them to the nines. But if it's like a random officer in another city and you don't know what they're supporting, we've seen it too many times where you've got officers just following orders, and that's got to stop. That's got to stop. And the officers in these big cities are really, really risking losing support from everybody. But that brings me back to, again, the problem is between the big city cops and the small town cops. The big city cops is like a totally different animal. And I think, these two different groups of people having conversations about what they think are the same thing, but they're talking past each other. I think if the rural folk were to say to the city folk, you know what, we're hearing you. We hear that you have police brutality in your city, and you know what, we even believe you. But my small town doesn't have a police brutality problem, and here's why it doesn't. Here's what we've done. Here's how our police interact with us that has led us to not having police brutality issues. And I think that just there's a problem with the politics being too polarized right now. If it wasn't such a hot political climate, maybe this is a conversation that could be going on. But in the future, what would probably be the most beneficial is for conservatives who are mainly living in rural areas to maybe not be pushing back so hard on police reform and saying, hey, you know what? You're right, city folk. You do need police reform. We don't. We're fine. Like, our police are doing great, and here's all of our stats that we're doing just fine. We don't have police brutality. But yeah, you know what? You're right. Your city cops, they got some issues. And, here's some recommendations of how we think that you could reform them. And I think that's the conversation that needs to be happening, not like blanket across the country. Every cop's bad or every cop's good. No, it's the cities versus the rural areas.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with everything that you're saying. But if I could also add a caveat to that as well, I think we're also asking a lot of our police officers, especially in major cities, to do too much. I mean, what is it called? What is it? The war on drugs. You have the war on immigration. You have the war on gang wars, illegal immigration. Et cetera, et cetera. And in many cases, especially places like Chicago, Detroit, these other, and in some cases, New York City. These are wars. The cops are walking away with like some of the highest PTSD rates in the country. Even compared to some active duty soldiers, suicide rate is astronomical. Even more for corrections officers. We're asking them to do so much. And my crazy hot libertarian take is that this shouldn't be a police action in the first place. I personally think that, like, if your crime is so bad and you have these organized crime syndicates that are so bad that you're dictating it a war, then maybe that's something that your National Guard needs to be involved in. People who have received, countless training, people who have been completely broken down and rebuilt to fight what you're calling a war, and to fight those situations, instead of asking people who are supposed to be community representatives and who work for a tremendous decrease in pay as well. There was a Navy SEAL on Joe Rogan's podcast not too long ago, and he talked about this. And he said that one of the problems with the police forces is that we're paying them so little that we're literally scraping the bottom of the barrel of people. And that's not a blanket statement on all cops. Like, I'm not saying all cops are dirtbags, but what I'm saying is that we're seeking out desperate people instead of trying to find the best for our community.
Well, that's another big difference between your city and your rural cops is your salaries between the two, between your New York cop salary and your no name Iowa town, is the salaries between them are going to be a lot closer than most other jobs would be between those cities. There's not good adjustment for cost of living, and you actually see you hear it a lot in a lot of these big cities is the police actually can't even afford to live in the cities that they're policing in because the cost of living is just too high. And if you're making 40 grand in a town of 10,000 in Iowa, you're probably living pretty high on the horse. You probably got a couple of acres. You probably got a few toys to drive around the four wheelers and stuff like that. Maybe you got a boat or a motor home or a camping site, something like that. You can live pretty good on 40 grand. You do that in New York, you can't even afford to drive into the city. You can't even afford an Uber, or you can't afford lunch for the day. So like that's the big difference too. Is as you said, you're scraping the bottom of the barrel because these are the people that they're either don't got anything left. They're not doing the cop because they're good at it. They're doing the cop because it's literally the only job they can get. Or two, they're doing the cop not because they like the money. They're doing the cop because they like the power. Whereas in the rural areas, you have the relative cost of living. The type of people they're going to be pulling in are be a little bit more from across the spread. They're going to be people who are like, you know what, I know this is a little bit of a pay cut, but I like doing this job and I can survive. I can even thrive on this much money. Whereas in New York, you just can't. I mean, you're below the adjusted poverty line for New York just by having your basic salary there.
Yeah, it's like you said, how can you expect somebody who can barely afford lunch or who can barely afford to feed their family, or many times they can't feed their families, which is why, again, inner city police forces divorce rates are so high,
and also corruption,
and you expect all of this from them. You expect them to do all these different things, and then you pay them piss poor. I mean, what do you expect? Are you really telling me that you're not it's a recipe for disaster? And then on top of all of that, now you're saying we need to defund you. Now we're telling you, oh, all of these things that we're expecting from you for the little money that we pay you in the first place, now we're going to reduce it even further. I mean, where is the thought and the strategy here? And clearly there is none.
Yeah, and that's where we get into the disconnect, and to kind of bring this back into the current political climate and the current political discussion is, Krieg and I are sitting here, righty libertarian cut types over here, but we just had a good hour and a half conversation about all the things we think are wrong with the cops and ways that we think we could change it, and I thought, well, I don't think I ever thought the lie that we were told is that BLM was presumably ready to have that discussion about police reform. And as I just went through, we were willing to have that conversation. There was a conversation to be had after, again, everything about Breonna Taylor was a lie, but we what we thought it was, again, it was maybe it was morally correct, and it was a thing that had happened in other ways and other incidents, and it wasn't a lie. It was a thing that could have happened because of the way the current setup is. And there was a discussion to be had that we didn't like that, and we were willing to have a discussion about it. But the left, same thing with George Floyd. After George Floyd, again, a lot of lies about that right off the bat, but you still had a lot of conservatives, a lot on the right were saying, hey, you know what? This doesn't look real great. I think that there's a conversation to be had about police reform. Let's have it. And it was an opportunity for unity. There's not been many topics in the last decade where it's been the left and the right generally agree on stuff. And This was one where both sides said, hey, we got a problem, let's talk. Except for the left didn't really mean it. They didn't mean talk. They were actually probably surprised that the right was willing to come to the table. And the left didn't actually want to talk. They just wanted to burn stuff down. And that's the problem, is there's no genuine intent to do police reform on the left. They are only interested in enabling criminal activity for various reasons. They have no genuine intent for police reform with the goal of public safety. They are there to enable criminal activity. Whereas the right, we thought we believed them. We believed them for a little bit there that maybe they genuinely did want police reform. They genuinely had goals. They genuinely had goals of keeping the community safe. And we were all willing to have that conversation. And then they're the ones that left the conversation. We're like, whoa. Like, we were with you guys. Why'd you leave? We were about to unify. We had congressmen, Republican congressmen leading police reform bills. We have again another Republican congressman leading no-knock warrant reform bills. Like we were there. We were there willing to do it, and the left is not interested. Their voices were heard. That's what they keep screaming in the streets. You got to hear our voices. We heard them. We were having a conversation. We were all about that, but they are genuinely not interested in that. It's a total lie that they had any interest at all in police reform, which I think is kind of sad because we didn't just have this conversation for no reason. We weren't lying about all these issues that we have with the way the police act. We weren't lying about that we think that some of these things need to be reformed, and here's how. But apparently the conservative, the right is the only side that actually had a genuine interest in it. And now, because the left has put on the table that the alternative is just absolute bedlam, burning down cities, pulling people out of their cars and beating them to death, finding you, throwing fireworks at your building and stuff like that, and burning your house down, all of that stuff. Now that that's on the table, well, you know what? You gotta go through that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where having the discussion about police reform is kind of in that self-actualization part of it. But now that the left has pulled me all the way back to basic safety concerns, I don't have any mental energy to discuss police reform or what could be beneficial to that. It's just, you know what? If the alternative is that the left is going to come burn down my house, you know what? I don't really care what the police do. It's acceptable casualties at this point, but I am not going to just have leftist anarchy in my streets pulling me out, doing whatever the hell they did in Germany back in the day. Like we're not going there. Now that the alternative is that the police unnecessary casualties suddenly become acceptable when compared to the alternative.
Yeah, and I really hate to say it, and maybe here's kind of my Alex Jones moment, but I mean, dude, like, if there was ever an opportunity for the left to make what they would consider, I'm not talking about the left as in the political establishment, I'm talking like the general people who are center left. If there was ever a moment for them to get what they consider progress in police reform, where the right wing is so disgusted by what they've seen on video on what's going on, and they're extending the olive branch saying, let's talk. But then you have this weird sort of, I don't know. It seems like a conspiracy to me where, like you had an opportunity, but you shat on it in such a way. It's like, okay, here, let's talk about it. Okay, let's go burn down cities. And I don't think, like, if you were to sit down with your average Black Lives Matter supporter, like, or even like Democrats, who aren't necessarily Black Lives Matter, but are pro police reform, they'd probably agree with just about everything that we talked about here tonight. Like your average Joe, right? But there's this weird something going on that I think is really nefarious. Why do we have U-Hauls appearing in the middle of the street, loaded with, Black Lives Matter and Antifa slogans, riot shields and weapons and signs and all this other nonsense? Why do we have pallets of bricks showing up in the middle of the street and all that kind of stuff? Why is the former Speaker of the House getting shut down on Fox News for talking about George Soros? There's something going on here, and I don't know what it is, but I'm telling you, I think it stinks, because I think the intent has never been, from Black Lives Matter, from Antifa, from any of these groups, the intent, and dare I say academia, the intent has never been social progress, reform, a better life for us all. It's a power grab. It's an intent for control. My family's from Hungary. Part of my family's from Hungary, and George Soros is a family name over there, and we know what he tried to do there, and it's a lot of this similar kind of stuff. And you talk to a lot of people in Eastern Europe funding these communist anarchist groups, these Marxist groups, to attempt to seize power and control. And I don't know if that's necessarily what it is, but my God, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, when are we going to start admitting it's a frickin' duck?
Well, for the
Nazi duck, for that matter.
The conspiracy. This conspiracy theory doesn't mean it can't be true. And that U-Haul, the most recent U-Haul that showed up in Louisville, was it 2 or 3 days ago? That was traced down. They found the person that rented that U-Haul. That person is absolutely funded by a George. She is a board member of a George Soros funded nonprofit.
Yeah, the bailout group.
Yeah, it was absolutely concrete connections. And, as for what you're saying with pushing back a little bit on what you said a little while ago was, if you sat down with a BLM person, they would probably agree with a lot of what we were saying. And maybe, but honestly, what I think the problem is that you sit down with a BLM person, I don't think they've ever thought about any of this stuff. I think that this is not to be too flippant about it, but a lot of these people are the NPCs. They've got their slogans. You can see in the sign in the background here. You got "No justice, no peace." Like, they have these catchphrases, these default phrases they've got loaded into them, but they don't have any meaning behind them. Like, they don't know what "no justice, no peace" means. Like, they don't have any thought behind that or philosophy behind that. They have all of these slogans that they repeat just like the NPCs do. But if you were to start talking to them, like, hey, like, come over here. Like, I actually do want to talk to you about police reform. I've got some ideas. I want to hear what you want to say about. Want to hear what you got to say about my ideas. Let's have a conversation and figure out something. And they just look at you and say, like, "No justice, no peace," because, like, they can't, like, they don't have anything else going on there. Part of that is you have this very, very weak-minded, feeble-minded almost generations, a few of them that were put through the public school system and then had their minds broken even more through the university system. We've got that where you've got these people that are been engineered through the schooling system to be receptive to these kind of revolutionary tactics. I talked about in the show a few weeks ago about went through some of the Yuri Bezmenov stuff and then the demoralization, the tactics that they went through that. And we're seeing a lot of that with these people. There's a lot of very scary parallels between what we see with the general population today versus what Yuri Bezmenov said that, predicted that it would be 40, 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing that. And so these people their minds are broken. They're not capable of running through the logic of cause and effect of the things that they're advocating for when they're speaking it. Like, when they're speaking out these slogans or supporting a politician, like, they aren't thinking through the cause and effect of that. And so I don't think that there's ever actually going to be a way of conversing with them. Again, we thought that there would be. And another way that they were able to, they that I mean, it kind of goes along with what you were saying about it, kind of conspiratorial, but I really don't think I think it is a conspiracy, but I don't think it's actually a theory. I think it just is an actual conspiracy of people who are plotting to do a thing. Part of that is keeping the censorship up. If these people get exposed too much to alternative ideas, a lot of these people, if you ask them, like, hey, do you think that any conservatives or Trump supporters would be interested in police reform? They probably say no. But that's because of the censorship, because you can't, they're not seeing that in their Twitter and Facebook feeds. If they were seeing that, they might realize, like, hey, the stuff that that I'm advocating for, like, the people on the other side actually want that too. Like, and some of them might be able to break out of that programming enough to realize, like, hey, I actually do want this. I do actually have a little bit of philosophy behind this. And I realize I can talk to these people on the other side of the aisle. Maybe we can actually get stuff done. A lot of people that you're seeing in the streets, though, that's the people that are, like, staying home. The people that you're seeing in the streets, like, there's no talking to them. They just want to have violence. That's it. That's all that they're there for. But, like, your average voter at home, I think that there's some ability to get to them if you could actually get to them, but the censorship is just keeping that coordinated off.
Right, and I think yeah, and that's kind of what I was trying to allude to, is that, never underestimate the evil that an individual can commit when the group has decided on something, and that's the thing, like. You get in, like, funny fun fact. Larry and I's first date was a Trump rally. But I've been in the fervor, I've been there, when the entire group is excited and chanting and fired up and sick of the shit. Right. Mm-hmm. And everybody gets really pissed off and does stupid shit, and it's just even then it's still just the few that out of that group that do stupid crap. Like if you watch like a lot of the BLM, the riot porn videos, you can even hear in some cases, not all, but in some cases you can hear people in the background, don't vandalize, don't burn, don't break shit, but they just when the fervor is high enough and the evil of the group is committed, it's just going to do it anyway, and they just because it makes them feel good because you're you're giving in to the will of the group around you. You're satisfying that need to feel a part of something.
It's I think the left is suffering from a similar thing that the right had when BLM came out and said, "Hey, we want police reform," and the right was like, "Hey, let's have a conversation. We kind of do too." I think and then we realized like, oh, BLM was lying. The left did that too. The left went to the BLM and said, "Yeah, like, hey, like we got similar goals. Like we're with you." And then BLM was like, "Hey, here's a Molotov cocktail," and they're like, "Oh," or like, "Here's a bomb to throw at the Portland Federal Building." Like, "Oh, I guess this is how we do police reform. I guess I'll throw it." And unlike the conservatives that push back and say like, no, like this is not what I signed up for. The left, they'll go along with it. They'll go along. That's where you get these stupid rich kids going out there and they're throwing bombs and Molotov cocktails, and
Yep.
their parents make $10 million a year, but now they're in jail for 20 years.
Yeah, and I mean, and in addition to that too, I mean, the difference between the right and the left is that the left, their propaganda is fucking everywhere. It's an international, cabal of corporations. It's CNN, MSNBC. I mean, shit. I'm even gonna go as far as say Fox.
Yeah.
Like it's everywhere. Like my relatives in Germany, they don't know anything other than CNN or BBC. That's all they know. I mean, at least on the right, we have so many different opinions and so many different trains of thought.
Super
Where on
big
the
time.
left, if you think differently than the collective, you are immediately cast out. You are immediately beat down. Where on the right, kind of similarly, but more from a moral perspective of the guy that shows up with the Nazi flag at the Trump rally, he's told to get lost.
Yeah.
Where in the left, if you don't throw the Molotov cocktail, well, you're a Nazi now. So it's like the opposite.
This might be maybe it's like overstretching, being like kind of facetious hot takes, but I think that on the left, you don't need to think a lot to be on the left because there is so much propaganda. There's a lot of things saying, hey, if you're on the left, this is how to think. Whereas on the right, I think, especially just because of the way the school system and the media system is set up, if you're on the right, you have to have thought through why you're on the right. And even if your parents raised you with conservative leanings, to stay conservative, you had to have battled all of that propaganda from the school system and the media system saying, okay, like here's why I still am conservative and not falling into the leftist trap. So when you have your leftist ideology being made Hello, am I back? Oh my God, that's awful. I just went through this like really great diatribe and I just Nobody heard it. Okay, so
Thanks, technology.
yeah, that was me bumping my mic. My cord's a little loose. I need to do something about that. Anyway, so what I was attempting to say. So it's very easy to be on the left because of, as you said, all that propaganda in the school system and the media. And when you have a leftist ideology, it doesn't require you having figured out principles and all that stuff. Creed, can you talk real quick?
Yep, I'm hello. Check.
Stream. Let me know if you heard Krieg too. When you're on the left, you just need to follow that propaganda. There's so much telling you what to say. Whereas if you're a conservative, you had to either have figured out a reason why you didn't follow that propaganda. It had to be some kind of intentional thought process to break out of that propaganda. Even if your parents raised you as a conservative, you still are fighting against all of that propaganda from the school system and the media system. And so to stay conservative after you leave your parents, you had to have, again, that requires intentional thought. It requires value building. And so for the left, when they're at the rallies, or the riots, and they're handed a Molotov cocktail, that's just receiving new propaganda. It's very easy to swap the propaganda in and out, and now you've got a new train of thought if you're on the left. Whereas on the right, because you actually arrived at those values through intentional thought, you can't just swap them out. Nobody can just swap them out for you, because you're like, hey, like, no, like, I thought this through already. Like, I know that this is what I believe. Whereas on the left, you just swap out the propaganda, and now they believe something else, and they're none the wiser. So they arrive at a riot, you hand them a Molotov cocktail, and they don't got any problem throwing it because, well, that's the new propaganda. Oh, you say throwing the Molotov cocktails going to further the cause? Okay, I'm all on board. I just follow what the left tells me to do. Whereas if you're on the right and somebody hands you a Molotov cocktail, you're going to say, no. I know myself. I arrived at these values through like a lot of thought and intention. Like, I know myself. That's not what I don't throw Molotov cocktails. I'm not going to do it. And so that's the difference between the left and the right. It's very easy to be on the left because of the propaganda. It's very easy to convince them to grow into that group mentality because you just need to give them new propaganda. Whereas the right is not susceptible to that because we have again, maybe I'm being a little bit conservative elitist here, but I think the right, your mental fortitude on your values is much, much more rigid structure. Not that it's inflexible, like in a bad way, but you've come to that conclusion through a lot of thought. It's not something that is just easily changed when the politics changed. Whereas the left arrives at their opinions through no thought at all. There's no thought backing that up. So if they get a new opinion, they'll just go ahead and run with that too. It's kind of the NPC idea. They're very receptive to getting new programming, whereas the right, we're not receptive to propaganda because we come up with our own ideas. We've come up with our own values through our own thought.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of the dilemma that like I've reached here with like myself and like what where do we go from here? I've been thinking a lot about Yuri Bezmenov and what he said. I've been listening a lot more to things that Jordan Peterson has said, and I mean the conclusion that I have reached, and I don't like it, is the left went from the anti-war hippies of the Bush years of Bush is a moron, he committed war crimes, war bad, drugs good, everybody should get along, gay rights, to just Marxism. I mean, this is Bolshevik Marxism. That's what this is. It's get with the picture or get up against the wall. And when you've reached that point, it's become a mind disease. How do you cure Marxist mind thought? How do you cure the ideology where you have stripped away the very thing that makes you human, your individuality, and forsaken it for a collective thought process? And I don't know. I don't know where we go from here because, it's like Yuri said, if you were to take a Marxist, a communist, bred, thought, brought up, raised, and indoctrinated in the Marxist thought, and you stuck them in the gulag and said, look at all of this, they would deny it as a CIA plot. I mean, it's almost incurable.
So we actually I talked about this a few weeks ago. I did a Fox special on the walkaway campaigns. Have you heard about the walkaways? Okay, so I strongly dislike the walkaways for a multitude of reasons. It was a 2.5 hour show. I was like, I can't compress it all now. But one of the things that we talked through was a lot of the walkaways walked away after the left turned on them. And so I actually quoted Yuri and that specific thing that you said, that specific story, that you could take a fully indoctrinated Marxist, and you could actually take from a Western country, you could take them to the gulags in Russia, and you could show them the horrible misery there, and they would say they would reject it. But Yuri said that there was one way to cure them. The only thing that would snap them out of it is when they were in the gulag themselves and they got put up against the wall. It was in those final moments when they finally snapped out of it. But, well, if you're in Russia, if you're Soviet Russia, that's the final moments, that's over. There was never, and I need to go through more of Yuri's stuff, but I don't think Yuri ever talked about is what happens if you take one of those people where the system is turned on them and tried to kill them. What if the killing doesn't work? What if they're still alive after that? Do they stay snapped out of it? And so I was relating that to the walkaways, where the walkaways were, the 2020 version of being executed in the gulags is being unpersoned on Twitter. The cancel culture, that's the equivalent of being murdered these days. Such civilized times we live in.
For now, anyway.
Yes, but the walkaways generally only walk away after they've been, quote unquote, digitally murdered or cancel cultured. And so it's not a genuine understanding of what's wrong. It's just that something is wrong and it tried to come after them. And they're like, oh crap. Like it really should be called Runaway, but so their conversion is not a genuine understanding. They understand enough, like, ooh, the stove's hot, I shouldn't touch it, but they don't understand why it's hot. They don't understand why it's good to not put your hand on the stove. They don't get that. So when they're walking away, and my problem with them is that they seem to be leaking into the conservative side a bit. And my problem is that if they are allowed, because they don't genuinely understand what the problem was with their previous ideology, they understand that there was some problem with it, but they don't understand why it was a problem yet. They just know that it was a hot stove and they pulled their hand away. Because of that, they don't understand what is wrong with themselves. They haven't internalized or thought through what was wrong with themselves, that they thought that this thing that was good for so long suddenly turned out to be bad. And so they still have broken reasoning processes. And my conjecture is that if they are allowed to gain power on the right, if the walkaways, over the course of the next few decades, if they're allowed to gain power on the right, because they don't understand what was wrong with their previous ideology, they will accidentally do it again. And so we should not allow them to gain power on the right, because they will accidentally turn us into the left again in 20 to 30 years. That was my conjecture, but it goes along with, what you just said. How do you cure them? Well, not necessarily a cure, but the way to snap them out of it is cancel culture we're not putting up in the gulags. That'll probably be the left someday. But the ones, if that ever comes to that, that's how you'll snap them out of it. As for now, the cancel culture seems to be a good enough equivalent to snap them out of it, but it's not a cure. It doesn't fix their brains. Their brains are still broken. They still have wrong reasoning. They just think that they're geniuses because they realized that the stove was hot and they pulled their hand away.
So that still leaves us with the problem. The problem being that we currently, by law, are forced to coexist with people that do not view reality the same way that the other half of the population views reality. There's a complete breakdown in everyday life for so many people. I mean, you and I, you know, we see crime and all of these things, or we see problems, and our immediate response is, well, I need to, work on myself. I need to better myself. I need to better my family, my local community, so that these things can improve. Where on the left, it's, well, I need to form a mob and destroy everything until I feel it has improved.
Yeah. Well, it's usually the Marxist thought, though, is usually the idea of flipping the pyramid upside down, and that doesn't just turn the pyramid perfectly inside out. It just makes a pile of rubble, and they're just hoping to climb to the top of it. It's the
Right.
idea that, like, communism is for the communists, not for the people. Whenever these communists and these socialists out there, when they're thinking about the communist utopia, they don't imagine themselves as being among the people. They imagine themselves as being in the party and making the decisions. And that's where you get this problem at. As for how to fix it, I've done a lot of thought on this. Dyer and I have talked a lot about this offline. What is the final solution to all of the broken-brained people, assuming that we are able to survive their attempt at overthrowing the Union. And I think that their inherent flaw, where they're so receptive to the propaganda, I think that is the way to fix it. I don't know that we could ever and I hate using the word because it's a leftist word, but I don't think that they could ever be re-educated into correct thinking. I think that that's something that's broken during their childhood, during their schooling process, that you cannot fix once your brain's crystallized as an adult. It's not as flexible then. I don't think it can be fixed. But what a solution could be is that the right just needs to be generating propaganda that fills that gap. If we can stop the left from generating their propaganda, the right could replace it with other propaganda, and they wouldn't be genuine conservatives, but they could be simulated conservatives. They could be NPC conservatives, and I would much rather have a bunch of NPC conservatives than a bunch of NPC Antifa. Even if they're not genuine conservatives, they would at least be made safe.
Well, the problem with the right is that we're so hung up on maintaining the moral high ground and following the rules.
Yep.
and doing all of that we allow the leftists to use our own constitution to attain their own power. And the thing is that it's a sharp, it's a knife's edge to walk, because you either have what you're describing, which is difficult to achieve without becoming the left, or you fall off the other side and you become the reactionaries. You become Poland, current day Poland, or 1936 Germany. It's and that movement, and for conservative people, I don't call myself a conservative. I consider myself a libertarian. But for the conservative circles, I highly recommend, that you watch your back and you watch what people are saying, because now is the time for the reactionary movement. Now is the time for the people that say, listen, enough is enough. We're going to get rid of them. We're going to end this. There is no more waiting. And that, for me personally, is far more scarier than blue-haired freaking crazy SJW warrior with a Molotov. I'm far more concerned about the future reactionary right that is going to get really sick of this shit.
Absolutely. And so the what I described was, if I had the choice, if I had the control over how to handle these people, that's how I would do it. But I am also concerned about what you said, and I think trying not to get too spicy here. Viva la revolution. one way that, not that I'm advocating for it, but one way that the problem of all of these people that cannot think for themselves and are just out there being these foot soldiers for this leftist ideology, and they can't concept themselves. They can't be taught into proper thinking to visualize reality correctly. As Yuri Bezmenov stated, that they would be it wouldn't be right up until the end. There would have an inability to perceive reality right up until it kills them. That could be what ends up happening, which moves a large chunk of these people out of there, is if one side or the other, if there is the open civil war that people keep talking about. And I know people keep saying, like, even if there is a civil war, it's not going to be like, mass armies out in the fields. It's going to be, just probably terror attacks on different buildings, which is what we see.
Syria.
yeah. I mean, that's what we see in the Middle East is, you want to know what does a civil war in America look like? Go look at Middle Eastern history for the last 40 years. You see what happens. It's not open conflict in the fields. It's just, random bombings here and there in the cities. And unfortunately probably where we would see. So I don't think it would be mass casualty civil war. It would just be very annoying. But that would be a way, is it, if you do have some far right group, or even if the white nationalists, all 17 of them, like suddenly think like now is the time. You could see something like that where they're saying, all right, enough's enough. And I'm almost surprised it hasn't happened yet. I am very surprised it hasn't happened yet.
I think it is happening. I don't necessarily think it's happening here, but, in Europe, the reverse is happening of what's happening here. In Europe, it's the young crowd that is more right-leaning, and the older crowd is further left. And the young crowd are flocking to these really, really fringe right groups. I mean, they just did a study of kids in Germany under the age of 25, and over a quarter of them already support a return of monarchy. so it's growing, and quickly, especially in Europe.
Thank you, Amazing Music, for the lemon. Much appreciated. And somebody subscribed earlier. Much appreciated for that too. Can't see what it is though. No, I wonder about that too, because the U.S. seems to be about 10 years behind Europe. I don't want to say culturally, but like culturally, politically, like combining the two. They went left earlier than us, and then we kind of followed suit about a decade later. And there's already a lot of indication that the Generation Z they've kind of stemmed the tide of being far left, and they're a little bit conservative, not nearly as much as previous generations, but it would seem that the trend is that the next generation is going to be more conservative again, and some of the kind of the sociological theories about that is just the young people like to be counterculture, and right now the counterculture is being conservative, and so I'm wondering if we will follow suit with Europe over the course of the next decade, where there is this resurgence of I don't want to say far right, but at least right wing. We see with Trump. I mean, I would consider that to be a right wing populist movement in the same vein that we see with the right wing populist movements in Europe and in Latin America. And where I guess keep an eye on Europe to see where they go, to try and figure out where we're going to go with that. But there's certainly going to be a backlash over the course of the generation. I don't think that people are going to want to keep doing this. I don't know. It is concerning. Now that you bring that up, I'm thinking through it, and it is concerning, some of the stuff that we see in Europe, because there's always that concern, especially European right. The European right is not the same as the American right, but there's always that concern that it'll go too far, and I think that maybe that's a concern in Europe as well. I'd be concerned about that on our side too.
Yeah, and like, what and this is the thing that like boggles my mind. It's like people here, the left here just doesn't get it. It's like, if you really want to see what fascism looks like, go take a trip to Poland where they have LGBT free zones in direct violation of the European Union's laws. I mean, like, I'm definitely no fan of the European Union, but LGBT free zones, what does that mean? That's a little bit concerning. And then in addition to that, geez, I really wish people would wake up and realize you have a right wing populist movement here in the United States following a center right, maybe even center left in some cases, president. Like, the guy is a 90s business Democrat. Like, there is nothing crazy right wing about Donald Trump. He's the largest centrist I think we've had as a president in a very long time. And maybe he's bombastic and that's why everyone thinks he's right wing. But, just wait till you actually get a right wing populist
Yeah.
as your president.
Yeah,
It's going to look a lot different.
Yeah,
I
and
promise you.
I'm hearing you what you're saying on the the LGBT stuff is I'm more of a personal view is it's just I do worry about the overcorrection backwards. There's been a lot of progress on rights for all kinds of people the last 30 years, and I don't know, the especially with like LGBT stuff is the LGB. I really don't understand why the other letters are attached to that because there's fundamental differences between trans issues and just liking different kinds of people. There's like fundamental differences between those two things, but they've mashed it all together and they've used it as a cudgel to just bash people over the head with. And you're going to see people saying, you know what, I don't care I'm not interested in hearing what the differences between gays and trans are. I just know that you guys are coming after me and there's people waving those flags in my face and they're trying to burn down my business and threaten my kids. Like, I don't care about the distinction. I'm not listening to you anymore. Like, you gotta go. Like, you just gotta go. You gotta get out of here. And like that's what the overcorrection is gonna be. And I'm also very concerned about that the left has pushed so far that they will unravel everything that they supposedly fought for over the last century essentially. I mean, you look at and by left I mean liberals in the more classic sense, not the leftists. But you look at a lot of really scary stuff with the leftists right now with all this racial grievance stuff, and they are. It used to be the far right was the one saying like no race mixing. It was the religious right saying like, okay, let's not have racial mixing. We got to have misogyny laws and that sort of stuff. And you can't even live together as roommates if your skin tones are too far off. And we changed that. And now we got a whole bunch of interracial families, and now the threat is coming from the left. You have the leftists, BLM, Antifa, the Democrat Party. Mainstream Democrat Party members are saying, we don't. We think that this interracial marriages, you're probably oppressing the minority. These are a problem. People who are mixed race don't have spaces to be in because it just depends on how dark they are, what they're allowed to be that day, and they are coming for. I mean, there's been a lot of articles in the last 2 months, and a lot before that too. But I've noticed a lot more recently talking about from the left, talking about the problem of interracial marriages, and it's like, whoa, like what the fuck do you mean there's a problem there? There was this one tweet thread that was real scary to hear about and read through. Some of it was this white guy, and he was married to a black woman, and they had interracial children, and they were obviously they were interracial children, very, very happy couple for several years. I think their kids were like up in their teens, and all of a sudden after this BLM stuff kicked off, he's like, all of a sudden my wife is like, she's the black one, and now all of a sudden she's internalized all this like racial grievance, and she thinks that like he's been oppressing her because he's white, and she doesn't know what to do.
Fuck.
She doesn't know what to do about her kids being interracial, and she's like doesn't like it, and she's concerned about it, and now she's trying to tell her kids that like, you know, like you guys are all like, you know, you're being oppressed and stuff like that. You just didn't realize it, and now she thinks that she's been like, because she was so happy, she thinks that like she was internalizing racism and all this stuff, and like she's going to destroy their family. And I bet you that sort of stuff's happening all over the place from the inside, but you're also the people who are not idiots, I guess, who are like, you know, I'm not oppressed. I'm just like happy to be in this interracial relationship. You're going to have it coming from the left saying like, you're not allowed to do that anymore. And that's scary. Yeah. That's scary for a lot of people. And I keep seeing stuff like on Twitter and just various articles, and I just about every week I'll retweet something saying like, they're gonna come for the interracials first. Like, they will come for you. They will, as bad as it was in the KKK days, they will do that again. They will absolutely do that again. They will come for you.
I think one of my favorite like poster childs for this whole thing is, can you imagine how fucked up the brain of fucking J.K. Rowling is right now, to have like lived through the 90s where you had crazy religious right conservatives saying that her books are promoting witchcraft, and then fast forward 20, 30 years, and now you've got the left saying that your books aren't fucking inclusive and diverse enough. So you had the religious right trying to ban her books, and now you have the progressive left trying to ban her books. It's like, dude, she's probably like the most centrist person on the planet at this fucking point. Nobody loves me.
You know, I wish there was some way to explain to everyone in America the level of importance that Trump banned the race, what is it called, the race realism crap, the racial grievance classes at the federal government, and the for any private companies that have contracts.
Critical race theory,
thank you. That he banned those lessons at the federal government level, and then any company that has government contracts, which my company has a lot of government contracts. Thank you, Trump. Even though my company, total aside, my company is Fortune 125, real close to cracking the Fortune 100. When all of the BLM stuff kicked off, a bunch of my friends' companies, like, they're like, oh my God, we got to do this stupid racial training stuff. I'm like, oh man, that sucks. We got an email from our CEO, and it was like, so there's like racial issues in America right now, and COVID is presenting us with challenges. Those challenges are, how do we make more money? And it was like, the rest of the email was like, how do we like thin out the business so that we can keep being profitable? And I'm like, fuck. Yes, this is exactly what I wanted to hear. Like, dude.
Meanwhile, you had my former employer, a medical cannabis company. The riots go on in Philadelphia. They burn down 3 of our dispensaries, and the response is, better fund the bailout program so that we can bail out the people that just burn down our products. Fuck.
Burning down a dispensary is like cliche, like getting high off that.
Well, most of them were looted, but I mean, why would you bail out the people that just looted your freaking dispensary?
Well,
like, what is the matter with you?
It's what we were saying earlier. It's the you get the propaganda, and you don't have an ability to like think through things properly. You don't have a good way of thinking through logical cause and effect. You can't perceive reality. You just get those propaganda updates, and so he wasn't capable of perceiving the reality and the cause and effect of the problem that they just caused him, but he got the propaganda update like, oh, you need to be supporting the ballot fund. He's like, oh, okay, like that's fine. Like I just accept the new programming. Like, great. Like everything's sunshine and rainbows as long as I'm following my programming.
Yeah, I don't know. It blew my freaking mind. Was absolutely a big push into finding other work.
So before I interrupted myself, how dare I? What I was saying, though, is I wish there was a way to explain to the American people like the importance of Trump banning the critical race theory from those things.
Right.
And hopefully expanding that out, because there is I can't imagine even your most lefty suburban family, white suburban family. I can't imagine that they are going to be pleased with their children growing up in the future that the critical race theory proposes they should be forced into. And they should, if this was properly explained to them with the correct context, I think that they would say, "Oh, they're going to do that to my kid? I'm voting for the guy that's banning that stuff." I think for your minority families as well that have that American spirit, that fervor to go getterness, which apparently is a white thing. That stick to itiveness, which I don't believe that, but that's what they say. And actually, I mean that's the thing too, is you're gonna have a lot of these families where like they bootstrapped themselves, they pulled themselves up, and they did the American dream, that sort of stuff. And if you explain to them properly, like, hey, the left is trying to use this critical race theory to teach your kids that they're nothing, and that if they are something, that it's because they've internalized whiteness, and that like on a genetic level, they're not capable of actually being somebody who goes out and does stuff that can follow time schedules, that can do math properly, that can like spell things right, or have that stick-to-itiveness. Like that's a white thing. That's not a minority thing. And they'll be like, they're teaching my kids what now? And if you could properly explain to them with the correct context and make them understand, like, that Trump is the guy getting rid of that. I think that if that was I keep going on, but I'll stop there. But if you could properly explain that to every American, I think Trump would win like 90% of the vote, because people, if they actually understood what was going on, they would not be for it. But it's so subtle. And that was part of what Yuri was talking about, was that the subversion, the demoralization is a subtle process, and you don't really know what's going on. You don't realize that it's happening. It just happens. But Trump's slamming the brakes on that. And if people understood what it was that he was slamming the brakes on, they would vote for him in droves.
No, I totally agree, and I think banning critical race theory is definitely like a ginormous leap forward. I mean, that unfortunately I don't think we'll see dividends paid on for a generation or two, and that's what's really unfortunate about all of it. However, and this kind of like brought to mind as well, for a lot of people, I've had the discussions about, the Civil War is coming or whatever, and they're like, oh, it's never going to happen. Most Americans aren't that far gone. I'm like, well, motherfucker, did you know that the revolution was only fought with like less than 10% of the population? It doesn't take the whole country to want to fight.
Wasn't it 3%? Isn't that the 3%ers thing?
Yeah, I think so.
Or is that
something like that?
Is it the revolution? Yeah, that was the revolution, I think. That wasn't the Civil War.
Yeah. Whatever. You're correct. But like the other thing that you have to realize too is that so that those are your patriots. So then what about the other side? Like, is the other side like all crazy radical leftist Marxists willing to like take up guns and execute freaking Bezos on the steps of Wall Street? No. And I think and Jordan Peterson pointed this out in one of his talks really well. And he said, if you look at the data and the research in Russia, he says basically what you have is if you have the village, who you had the people who were recently freed from serfdom, which is pretty much slavery. You had the couple of people who were the smart individuals who said, okay, well, I'm going to create an agriculture. I'm going to seize the opportunity and create an agricultural business, and everybody in that town kind of benefits from that, and most of the people come to work on the farms and things, and everybody gets to eat, and the people who came up with the idea get to profit off of it. But then you have the Bolsheviks that come along, and there's another smaller group of people as well. And that smaller group of the people are the people who don't work, the people who never produced a thing in their effing life. And they're the people who the Bolsheviks say, hey, you know what? Those people over there who decided to build those farms and build the agricultural business and community, you know what? they actually stole that from you. They took that from you. It's not theirs. It belongs to you. So now you've convinced that small group of people in our society, that would be, the trust fund kids, the suburbanite losers who, are going to survive their entire lives on mommy and daddy's big paycheck. Now they've convinced those people that you can commit any evil that you want to, anything that you want, because in the end, it's a moral good, because you're taking back what was already taken from you. And that's not everybody, but the Bolsheviks weren't all of Russia. It was a small group of radical revolutionary individuals who eventually were all put against the wall because, even they had a brain.
Well, and again, like I guess saying earlier, I think that in America, it'll look similar to what it looks like in the Middle East. And I think you see that what you're saying with it's that small group of the population that's actually causing the problems in the Middle East. I mean, certainly they're all united in their hatred of Jews, but the people actually committing the terrorist acts, and I don't know any of the regions enough to confidently say a particular group's name, but those groups are not the majority of the population. They're small parts of the population, but they're still capable of destroying those countries. Just because of the instability that a small portion of your country has, just small portion of the population willing to commit these terrorist acts, to burn down buildings, to terrorize the population, to make sure that your country is economically unstable, to make sure that the government's not stable. That is enough. Just a very small amount can throw off the whole system.
Yeah, and I think what a lot of people need to realize too, in the talks about what I believe to be the coming American Civil War is, I think everybody can agree together that the Syrian Civil War is pretty awful and it really sucks, and a lot of good people are dying over there for all sorts of different causes. But what you also need to realize is that Syria's tourism industry has never been more profitable. And that they're bringing in more people now for tourism than they ever have in the entire history of their country. And once you realize that it can look like everything is status quo and normal, but what's status quo and normal is you can easily forget like what that status quo used to be like even a year ago, even 6 months ago, when you've been living 6 months of absolute hell.
Yeah.
And it looks like everything's fine to you now, but I mean, shit. I mean, to me, to my grandparents who came here in the late 30s, early 40s, they've never seen shit like this today. I mean, such a disconnect of the people. And I think that's important to remember, that our status quo has severely changed in the last 5 to 10 years.
I think one of the last points I bring up here before we call it a close here, I completely agree with that. I think that the extra special sauce that we have in this particular evolution of that same thing that always happens over and over again is that because of the modern era, especially with movies and video games and the way the culture is, there is, and I think we're seeing this a lot with the people out in the street, is a lot of people are saying that they're LARPing. They're reenacting things that they've seen on TV or in movies. And I think that's absolutely true. And so the media, the media in the sense of like movies and TV shows and games and stuff like that. I'm not saying video games cause violence. I'm just saying that there's a desensitization going on where I've been watching a lot of this rioting on the TV, on the computer, on in video. Like, I've not actually been to or seen one of these. If I didn't have the internet, I wouldn't know that any of this stuff is going on. But I'm watching it on TV, and it doesn't look completely dissimilar to like movies and TV shows and video games that I play. And a lot of these people, again, they're reenacting things that they've seen on TV. That's why you always hear them, these Antifa guys, medic, like they're in fucking Saving Private Ryan or something. Like they're like they're reenacting a thing that they've seen before. Like they think that's how you do that. And so the kind of what you were saying is there's kind of this idea that like things will be normal, but I just think that there's like this desensitization that is going to be the X factor, kind of a multiplication, like multiplying that effect. But because they're desensitized, they'll be more willing to engage in the violence because they don't have a context for that's wrong because they're desensitized. And the people seeing it, I think that they're also going to be saying like it's hard to believe. Like it's almost hard to believe. I bet you a lot of the people in Kenosha, I bet you that first night, there's a lot of people that just did not believe that was going on. I know I saw some of the interviews with the business owners the next morning, and there's people that just have like that'll be like a psychotic break moment, even a minor one where it's just like there's no way this is really happening. And it's really happening. It's really happening. And I just think there's a lot of patterns that are happening right now. Like they're not new. Like these are things that have happened throughout history. They're patterns that have played out throughout history. But the difference is the density of the population and the technology. Like that is the big X factor that we have in trying to have a revolution in a modern Western country in 2020 that we've never seen an example of this, and we couldn't have seen an example of it up until very recently just because of the way the internet is. It's going to be that X factor of technology and population density is going to really throw these things into a direction that we won't be able to predict.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I would personally say that technology is probably the biggest variable I think that will make the future of what happens to this country and what a possible future conflict amongst each other will look like, and if it will happen at all. I think technology, in my personal opinion, is the biggest factor in that.
Big agree. Alrighty, guys. Well, that was a lot of fun. I think I said at the beginning that we didn't know where this was going to go, and I think we thoroughly got to a place that I couldn't have predicted that we would get to along a lot of conversations I never predicted we would have. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, Krieg. It was a fantastic
Thank you for having me.
Certainly. I'll be doing Friday solo for a few more weeks. Dyer's got his OnlyFans to deal with. But if you would like to come back, you are certainly very welcome to, and you're always welcome on the Saturday show, which I heard you are having festivities tomorrow and will maybe watch but not be available for.
I'm going to go and embrace my Deutschbag heritage and celebrate Oktoberfest.
Hell yeah. Well, have fun with that. You are you still doing any content? I know you were trying to redo your podcast for a little while there.
Yeah, I really want to. Unfortunately, I'm in between jobs currently.
Okay.
And I might be spending 3 weeks in Georgia for training for said job. So I don't know yet.
Right.
But yeah, I really would like to get back into it, and I would like to do this Friday chat with you, hopefully here in the future.
Hell yeah!
I really enjoyed this a lot.
Yeah, I did too. Okay, cool. Well, follow Krieg. Let me pull up your avatar. It's actually got the
on the twatters.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, follow Krieg at Krieg __ Blackpaw on Twitter, and then he'll be around again. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Very, very nice long form conversation. I feel like we're channeling Sargon of Akkad. I saw him. He had a live stream with somebody today, and I saw it like
with Destiny.
Yeah, I saw it earlier in the day, and it was like Sargon's live, and then like 3 hours later, it was like Sargon's still live, and I'm like, damn, nice. And then I think it finally uploaded the complete clip, and it was like almost 4 hours. So I don't think we hit quite 4 hours, but it's not without precedent to just talk for a long time. I'm glad you guys could join us. Dyer will be back tomorrow for our Saturday weekly news recap on the Direwolf Show, and that will be at 10 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Hopefully, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if you've got the curse, Krieg. So when Dyer and I have a show together, it doesn't happen when I have a show by myself. But when Dyer and I have a show together, there's usually some sort of like major incident that happens. So we had a show during Jacob Blake. Like the news broke while we were having the show. I believe the Kyle Rittenhouse thing happened. No, because that was a weekday. What else was it? It was the Portland like execution that happened during the show. There was something else that happened that was like a big thing that happened during the show. So like we've noticed that over like the last like 3 or 4 weeks that there's been like major like news cycle incidents that happened during the show. So we'll see if you've got the curse. Maybe something happened in the last 2 hours. We'll find out tomorrow. But certainly, I don't know. How'd your kids? How'd your wife? Tomorrow for the Direwolf weekly news recap, because Direwolf will be back, and something bad will happen.
Listen, man, as long as the beer is there tomorrow, I'm happy.
All right, guys. Well, have a good night. Thank you very much for joining us, Krieg.
Yep. Thank you for having me.
See ya tomorrow. Travis signing off. Yes, RBG will be resurrected as what was this thing in the Game of Thrones? Like the Ice King. That's what.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh shit, the Witch King.
There we go.
Rickety wrecked.
Guarantee that'll happen.